Now, just a quick warning before we begin, there's going to be some pretty major spoilers in this video for the latest episode of Ahsoka, that being the 6th episode. So if you haven't seen it and don't want anything ruined, it is a really good time to click away. Okay, so once again with this latest episode, there is something that has become a sort of point of contention that I see a lot of people or fans discussing or even arguing over. And this time it was whether or not it makes sense that Ezra was able to elude Thrawn on this mysterious night sister planet called Peridia for 10 years. Does it make sense that Ezra was just living with some rock-back snail people, whatever you want to call them, a few miles away from where Thrawn was, and that Thrawn hadn't found and or dealt with him? And I know a lot of people will quickly point out that yes, the episode tries to show us or subtly tell us why this is the case, why Thrawn is unable to capture him or no longer considers Ezra a threat and is just letting him be, more or less. I mean, again, he is just living with some rock people and doesn't seem like he's actively trying to interfere with what they're doing. So why waste the limited manpower and resources they have on finding him, especially if you're leaving the galaxy soon and will be leaving Ezra behind? And for the most part, that seems like a pretty solid enough explanation or reason for Thrawn to leave Ezra alone. I even say as much in my initial review that it's probably the case that Thrawn is just leaving Ezra alone because there's no point in messing with him if he's leaving you alone. Basically, you don't poke the beehive if the bees are leaving you alone, and you are only risking the bees coming and stinging you if you poke at it. But upon thinking about this even more, and to partially play a bit of devil's advocate here, and this is meant to be in good fun, don't get all pissed off at me because I'm trying to counter-argue the idea that Thrawn would just let Ezra live, relax, let's have some fun with this. But what I think some people are almost downplaying a little too much or forgetting about is that this is Thrawn we are talking about here. This is one of, if not the most brilliant minds we've ever come across in Star Wars. This is a guy who outsmarts virtually every opponent by being steps ahead of them, and recognizing a threat before it potentially even becomes one. And certainly Ezra Bridger has been one before and could very much be again, even if his current surroundings or conditions are living with rock people with no lightsaber and no real motivation to even go after Thrawn beyond it being the right thing to do. One way or another though, he is or could be a threat to Thrawn once again. I mean, we are literally talking about the guy who stopped him the first time around. He's the one that brought in the Purrgil and defeated him, and Thrawn is just kind of okay with him, with this wild card of sorts we could call him. He's okay with him just still being out there, so near his operations. I mean, it's very, very likely, if not probable or a certainty, that whatever effort our heroes mount to stop Thrawn from returning to the other galaxy in these final 2 episodes will include Ezra Bridger. And though, yes, we the audience know that Thrawn is almost certainly going to win in the end of this series and make his triumphant return to the other galaxy, Thrawn obviously doesn't know that and does have to believe or fear or consider something going wrong with his plan at some point. That there's always a chance, albeit a remote one, that someone will come along to try and stop him and that Ezra could be a powerful ally to them. And thus it makes sense to eliminate that possibility in the 10 years you had to do it. There's even a chance that whatever eventually permanently stops Thrawn at some point down the road, that it will also include Ezra Bridger, further making these past 10 years a wasted opportunity by Thrawn to remove Ezra from the board, to here and now, while he's isolated and alone and a much easier target to deal with, to remove a threat that, let's again remember, has defeated him before. And of course some will point out that no, Ezra is not an easy target to just deal with, that early on or after first arriving in this other galaxy, Thrawn likely tried to take out Ezra but lost plenty of men and resources to the effort, hence why he just eventually gave up and now leaves him alone. But again, this is Thrawn we're talking about, right? And I kind of find it hard to believe he's unable to deal with one partially trained Jedi, or a Padawan essentially, who himself has limited resources and allies. Especially considering that no, Ezra is not anywhere near a match for Thrawn's intellect. He may have bested him with the Purrgils, but that trick is only going to work once, and if anything, that level of unpredictability out of Ezra would make Thrawn all the more worried about what else he could potentially do later on, and would only increase the likelihood that Thrawn would not rest until Ezra was taken care of, until this potential threat was eliminated. Again, Ezra is like this wild card, or this huge uncertain variable, and that's not something Thrawn is just going to ignore because it's easier this way. Especially when you keep in mind that this is what Thrawn does. This is what he's famous for, if you will. Figuring out his opponents and defeating them is what he thrives on, and letting an opponent not only beat him once, again at the Battle of Lothal with the Purrgil, as well as to continually outsmart and elude him for 10 years would likely get to the ego of Thrawn. Ezra, the only one to have ever outsmarted him and essentially beaten him, would almost certainly become Thrawn's white whale, no pun intended, that he had to take down, that he had to get rid of this threat while he easily could, relatively speaking. And Thrawn still does have plenty of ways to take Ezra down. He still has resources at his disposal, like, oh, I don't know, the Star Destroyer and a full complement of TIE fighters. I mean, it's not like Thrawn would ever be foolish enough to just send a squad of stormtroopers after Ezra when he has the high ground and could take him out from above. All he has to do is figure out where Ezra is and have that area bombarded, essentially. And with just a little bit of effort, Thrawn could easily figure out where Ezra is. Again, this is what he does. This is what he is famous for. The guy can look at a few pieces of artwork and discern a species' entire culture and habits right down to their battle strategies and almost instantly formulate a counter strategy to defeat them. But the migratory habits of little rock people has confounded him? Really? Because they move around a lot? Thrawn can't keep tabs on them very well? And Thrawn is apparently keeping tabs on Ezra. He did have intel on him that he gave to Sabine. And I'm very curious what that intel even entails or how they've obtained it. Is it as simple as some of the nomads have spotted Ezra and it got back to Thrawn? That's all they really know. He's in that general direction. Or is Thrawn actively tracking him to some extent, keeping literal tabs on him? And if so, again, why not simply devise a plan to eliminate him once and for all, instead of continually wasting resources just keeping tabs on him? I mean, honestly, what else does Thrawn and his men even have to do most of the time? What does his average day even look like? And yeah, the logistics of keeping a Star Destroyer and the personnel supplied and fed and all of that is no doubt a tall task in this other galaxy. The state of their ship is evidence of that. But you're telling me that Thrawn literally does not have the time and resources to track down Ezra Bridger, to track down one guy who is 5 miles away from his base of operations? And what about the Night Sisters? Isn't the stench of the Jedi nearby bothering them and something they would want to deal with? They seem to really not like Jedi if they can recognize their smell. Aren't they worried about him still being out there? I mean, they seem very worried about the other Jedi that's now coming, and so does Thrawn. He wants to know everything there is to ever know about Ahsoka, right down to her favorite food, it seems. But Ezra, he's fine with just letting exist out there. Plus, does Thrawn even have to use his own resources to go after Ezra with the Night Sisters around? Couldn't he just convince the Great Mothers to use their dark magic again to do something about this Jedi that they clearly hate? Can't they just raise the dead or animate them and keep sending them time and time again after Ezra until they finally get him? I'm sorry, I guess I just find it a little odd that one of the biggest fears a lot of us fans had going into the series was them getting Thrawn right or getting him wrong. And the first thing we get out of him is arguably something that gets him wrong. That the first thing we learn about him is that he has an inability or a lack of desire to deal with Ezra Bridger, who in all reality has been and would remain a threat in Thrawn's eyes, and is not someone who'd be able to outsmart Thrawn for even 10 days, much less 10 years. I mean, he can't capture one Jedi after 10 years and having plenty of advantages over him when you really think about it, but he's going to lead the outnumbered remnants of the Empire to victory after victory over the New Republic? I don't know, maybe I'm expecting too much out of Thrawn, but isn't that what we're supposed to expect out of Thrawn? Too much? The impossible in some ways? Or maybe there's something else we've yet to learn here? Maybe Ezra made some sort of deal with Thrawn and we have a big twist coming? I don't know. But again, to me it seems very, very convenient that Thrawn hasn't dealt with Ezra after all this time. That he's just let him live and is now all about leaving him alone. I thought for sure something would be up with Ezra, that he may have even joined with Thrawn, because that was the only way for him to survive, the only way for him to not be killed by Thrawn. But it turns out all he had to do was lay low with some rock people, and he's just fine. Well, that's all I got for you this time. And once again, this was all in good fun. Don't get all pissed off at me in the comments. But either way, it's your turn to now take to them and tell me what you think about all this. Does Thrawn's strategy to leave Ezra alone make sense? Or should he have spent the last 10 years, not that it would have taken that long, should he have spent some time devising a way to remove this threat permanently? A threat that has defeated him before, and that now has friends on the way to make him a threat once again. But whatever you think, leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.